For beauty, I'm not a great star. There are others more handsome by far. But my face, I don't mind it, for I am behind it. It's the people in front get the jar.
These are Belgian horses. We've had different breeds through the years, but they're all farm horses. They're not riding horse particular, but when we were children, we rode them just as if they were. Bareback, of course, but we loved them. But horses, as far as I'm concerned, are a practical thing around the farm for some jobs. Gathering sap, of course, being one of them. Some other jobs, skidding in the bush. 2 feet of snow doesn't bother a horse very much in the wintertime, so there's no crust on it, but it's a great handicap to a tractor. So in the winter, I use my horses in the bush, and they don't mind a bit. They love it. Some of those trees go back to the time when my great-grandfather first came to this country 150 years ago, which means they're old. Your best maple syrup tree is a tree of probably around 60 years of age. They'll run sap, in other words, from age 40 to maybe 120. But by the time age 120, they're starting to dry up and wither like I am at 72. When there's been enough heat to melt the snow away from the trees back for a foot or so, it's about ready for sap time. The same amount of heat will thaw out the tree a little bit. The way we make syrup is almost exactly the way they did it 100 years ago. We drill a hole in the tree, put in a spile, and run the sap into a bucket, collect it, and take it to some place where we boil it down into syrup. Okay, now it's dripping.
See, that sap is dripping, and I didn't think it was. It was cold this morning.
One tap.
I started when I was just old enough to walk. We would go up with our father to the bush. He made syrup in a fairly small way, but he made syrup every spring. And we'd take about 3 pairs of extra socks, so we'd have dry socks. And as soon as my sister and I could walk, we were in the bush helping gather sap. And that's not yesterday, it's between 60 and 70 years ago. The job of the horses is to move equipment around the bush for you that's a little heavy to carry, and then to move the sap around the bush. We don't count on carrying the sap more than 30 or 40 feet to a collecting tank, which the horses pull on a little single sleigh, and it's very low. Obviously, you can step on and off it. You don't have to have somebody start a motor. You'll often have them just step ahead on their own to the next pickup point, and they get a little ready to go before they're supposed to sometimes. But that's the job of the horses. They're much more efficient than a machine, where you almost have to have somebody sitting on the machine to do it. Happiest spring memories are going with my father to make syrup in the bush exactly the way we do it now, except that we had just open flat pans instead of a maple syrup evaporator. basically did the same job, but they were just flat pans. And we did it out in the open, where now I have a little sugar house over to keep the rain out of it. I now boil in stainless steel pans the way they do in the sugar house. The big evaporators are stainless steel, and a stainless steel holding tank. But the buckets themselves go back nearly 100 years, and if you look after them, they'll last obviously quite a while. I don't think the plastic pipeline will last that long.
Primitive, but it works more or less. What I have in this pail, ready? Sap slightly sweetened. Probably about 4 times as sweet as it was when we gathered it from the buckets. I've taken it from the back end of the evaporator. Now, we used to finish syrup in the evaporator.
You'd have a tremendously hot fire there, and sometimes very hard to control the syrup, because it'll boil up all over things when it gets to be syrup. And the only way around that is let your fire down for a few minutes while you take off syrup. Of course, with an oil-fired evaporator, you can control that. With wood, you can't very readily. So we take it off when it's only, well, it's very sweet, but it's not syrup yet, and finish it on a secondary pan where we can just let the heat down to suit ourselves. You evaporate water out of sap, is what it comes down to. You put all the heat you can get under it, boiling with wood, burning as hot as you like. As long as the pan is covered, you're okay. And evaporate that water as fast as you can. And when it gets, when you get enough water out of it, it gets a little sweeter, and it boils at a higher temperature. If water boils at 212, it doesn't actually in this country, it boils more like 211, 7 degrees hotter than boiling water, you've got syrup.
Okay, the thermometer tells me scientifically, but that's flaking off the end of that dipper, and I know when it flakes, it's syrup. We've got syrup in that pan now.
When you take the syrup out of the finishing pan, there's bits of dust and bits of things in it that you don't want there, so you strain it or filter it is the more modern word. This is through a filter or some kind of composite strainer that will remove very fine particles from the syrup. So you get a very clear product once it's gone through the filter. The average operator who makes syrup on any major scale uses pipeline today. The advantages being that you can tap before the sap starts to run and it doesn't dry up, and you don't have to gather it from individual buckets as we do. It's labor intensive either way you go about it, and my way of doing it is kind of a no-brainer. Anybody can drill a hole in a tree and let sap run into a bucket and go around and collect it. You have to be smart to run a pipeline, and I never considered myself very smart, so well, we're only making it on a small scale. We're not worried about trying to compete with anybody. It's just a bit of fun for the children and grandchildren, and when it ceases to be fun, we'll quit it. Nobody will miss us.